A couple of ways to approach Baldur's Gate. We can go all in terms of Math Hammer. We're just going to break down the numbers. We're going to assemble the numbers. We're going to get as many modifiers as we can. And essentially being a dice-based game, much like tabletop D&D, classes that can generate larger amounts of dice, have a larger amount of hit points, they're going to deal more damage. They're going to do better in the game because despite having an amazing role-playing feel to it and various sub-quests and decision trees, it's like AD&D. 90% of the game is combat on there. So just being able to dominate on the raw numbers alone, that works. On the opposite extreme side, we have character classes that are completely narrative, are completely role-playing on there. And either they're not very good, like the Wizard Slayer, just poor implementation, or they're kind of quirky. They're fun, they're interesting, they're not overly bad, but a lot of things could be better. An example of that would be the Shapeshifter. And then there's some classes, the Monk, which we're going to look at in this podcast, in this vlog, that they could be better. They excel in certain areas, but you really not only need some careful planning, you need to be aware of what you're going in as. And from the perspective of playing a monk, the first question I ask, are you just playing Baldur's Gate 1, or are you planning to go through the entire series, the entire saga? And second to that, are you planning to solo, or are you planning to party up? That answers a lot of questions, because if you're playing kind of a Math Hammer character on there, you're playing certain wizard builds, certain sorcerer builds, certain fighter builds, dual builds, you don't need anybody. You just kind of blast through the entire series. If you play certain character classes that are fun and narrative, you really need the party. That's not to say you can't solo it or beat the game. You really need some help on there. And then there's classes like the Monk, which could solo, absolutely, but there's some considerations. And more importantly, if you do party up, having the right composition for the party will really help the Monk shine, especially at the later levels. Early on, Baldur's Gate 1, the Monk is weaker. The Monk kind of requires a lot of handling. There's a couple encounters, no spoilers, that you will just kind of slog through. But then as you move through the saga and you make it to Baldur's Gate 2, and the Monk starts getting some high-level abilities, the Monk starts picking up magic resistances, you get Quivering Palm, all of a sudden, the Monk is like, wow, this is amazing. This is really, really fun to play. So, and of course, if you have access to the entire saga, you could just say, look, I'm going right into BG2. We're just going to skip the brutality of the first aspect of it. But then you get into questions of, are you going to open up an editor and edit your stats, or do you want to make a run through BG1 to get some tomes and to get some other buffs? No right or wrong question. So much like AD&D tabletop, the Monk is a specialist. The Monk's role in the party is one of focus. And what I mean by that is people think playing a fighter class in Baldur's Gate is easy. There's actually a lot more to it with it in terms of management and gear and clicking and managing buffs and things. But a fighter, and I say that because I'm going to simplify it a little bit here just for the sake of this podcast, a fighter is going to get up there, engage the appropriate enemy, and just deal as much damage as they can. The Monk doesn't have the raw hitting power in terms of damage and doesn't have the hit points and the resiliency of a fighter. A Monk is not a frontline fighter. A Monk should be holding back and utilizing the speed and the number of attacks to identify key targets and engage them, or kind of physically a holding pattern. Because what's interesting in Baldur's Gate, the way the AI works, and this isn't a criticism because it does a great job, but obviously it's different than having a dungeon master. If there's a beholder and I run up there with my Monk and I start whacking on that beholder, if I've engaged it and it's engaged me, we're now locked till I run away and break that engagement on there. Pen and paper D&D, if I'm a DM, I can make a decision. Okay, Fritz ran up with his Monk Tozen and is hitting away, it's the beholder's turn, initiative. I'm going to turn and move and attack this other character on there. So the monk is utilized as a delaying action or a very, very specific target action. Let's look at an example. You're fighting, no spoilers, you're fighting, there's a couple of wizards that you have to fight, and they've got some mobs. The question here is, mobs can be very, very dangerous because since Baldur's Gate is a D&D D20 system, if you have 5, 10, 15 things attacking you, even if they're not that powerful, they could roll 20s. Engage in the panel there rather than a hit or miss. Just do single combat animation and do show the numbers, and you'd be surprised how many times a 20's rolled on there. You can get torrented down. So sometimes as a fighter, you want to attack the trash mobs. You just want to take out 3 or 4 or 5 things in 1 or 2 hits, get those numbers down. That's why the Knoll Stronghold is a little bit tougher than people think, just on the raw numbers attacking you and the choke points as they move around those pits. It's a lot tougher than it looks just on paper. So sometimes as a fighter, you want to run up and do that. Now, of course, the wizard, depending on the level that you're fighting, the mage, it's going to go through the script. It usually has defensive spells. It might have some attack spells on there. Usually the script is defensive mirror image. Hey, that makes sense. Playing a magic user, AD&D, most of the time, first thing that goes down after initiative is shields up. Blur, mirror image, maybe a stone skin. Get my defenses up because eventually something is going to engage me. Then the AI likes to pop off some sort of crowd control, which is going to be just a dice off against saving throws. That's why saving throws are important, because you lose control of your character or characters, party. You're running all around. So you're going to get hit with confusion, hold person, feeble mind, something to have that annoying little globe over your head as you just kind of run around. While that happens, then you're going to be hit with lightning bolt, magic missile. They love Melf's acid arrow because they don't know quite what they're engaging on there, and they want the residual damage to kind of disrupt abilities or spells because they don't know what your main character is. So going through that process, you want to interrupt things as quickly as possible. You might be able to do this with an archer if you've got some ranged characters, or maybe they're throwing axes or whatever it's going to be. But the monk really works well. Essentially, this is the setup for the monk. The monk works really well because it has speed. It is the fastest character in the game before you get into magic items. And then when you stack certain magic items, makes them even faster. So you're going to be able to get up there right away and get into a position. And while you don't do a ton of damage, we're going to look at a moment between the frost damage of the Dark Moon monk and the damage of a vanilla monk in terms of stunning fist on their stunning blow. It's not so much the damage, it's the number and the flurry of attacks to interrupt or add a little bit or to engage. So monk is a little bit hard to play as the main character solo because you're responsible for everything on there. As a party, it becomes much, much easier if you're going to pick up Dorn, if you're going to pick up some of the other tanks in the game on there, or even if you're going to go kind of a more narrative party, you physically have more bodies, you've got some summons you can throw up. So that's kind of the first utilization question of the monk. So let's talk about armor class, because this is really, really deceptive on there. Armor class in Baldur's Gate 1 is important. You want to work on it. Whether you're a wizard, you're a fighter, or you're somewhere in the middle like a monk. Because the fights do scale up, but a decent, healthy armor class, right? Getting it down to -1, -2, around there. That's the first layer of defense. Obviously, if the monsters you're fighting roll legendary, that happens, but armor class is going to cause a miss on a lot of things. A couple of the end fights, no spoilers. Of course, they're so jacked up, they're just going to be hitting you again and again and again and again and again. But armor class is your first layer on there. As you move into Dragonspear, as you move into Baldur's Gate 2, armor class becomes less important because a lot of the things that you're attacking, fighting, their Thaco is just insane. and on top of that, they have innate spell abilities or actual spell abilities that are just going to blast you. So the monk, you can't wear armor, but your armor class gets better as you level up. And you're like, hey, that sounds pretty good. It's actually early on not, because you can't invest in armor class in terms of, essentially all you have is the innate armor bonuses for the monk and your dexterity on there. They fixed, well, I won't say they changed the bracers, so that's not going to lower it down. You could get a +1 or +2 ring of protection. That's going to help. Generally, early on, I will, for my ring slots, go with a +1 or a +2 ring of protection, simply because my monk, levels 1 to 4, my hit point pool is so small. I need every point I can get, even though it's still awful. But then really once I hit level 5 or above, I'd rather free up that ring slot for some of the other really, really good rings in the game. No spoilers, you'll discover them on there, but you're going to quickly see I'd like to be able to utilize that slot, either because it's very good or it's for the lulls to play it. But essentially, you can never generate enough alpha as a monk for the armor class on there. And through at least more than half the game, you just struggle. You're getting hit. You don't have a massive hit point pool. It's challenging. Now, once you move on later in the game, everybody's hitting everybody. That completely changes things. So again, this goes back to the precision attack of the monk, where I want to run up, I want to punch you a little bit, and then I want to move away on there. I want to utilize that. I don't want to be the front-line fighter. I'm a second-tier, second-line fighter. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just how it plays. Okay, you're going to solo, or you're like, hey, I want to be in the action on there. The way to play that with the monk, run and gun on there, because you want to utilize darts or throwing weapons, and when utilized with your speed, absolutely with your speed, that's going to allow you now to move up, throw some stuff, get off 1 or 2 attacks before whatever closes, and then run to the other side. Throw some more stuff, run to the other side. It gets a little tedious on there. It slows things down a little bit. You're going to go through consumables like crazy. You got to keep those consumables up. If you're doing solo, you're flush with cash. It doesn't matter if you're in a party or a half party. Cash management halfway through the game becomes important. Later in the game, you've got so much cash, it's just out of control. But by then, there's nothing left to buy in the game. Weapon proficiencies on there. Taking the weapons proficiency to give you the +1 to armor class, without the proficiency to give you that specialization. Okay, maybe on there, but I'd rather spend my proficiencies on a primary type weapon and a throwing type weapon. Even if I'm going to specialize early on in one or the other, ultimately the flexibility of the monk, I want to be able to utilize fists, I want to be able to utilize magic weapons, and I want to be able to utilize thrown stuff. All right, so now we've got the core. The eternal question in my mind is going to be Dark Moon or Vanilla on there. So both get access to Quivering Palm. Both have magic resistances. The big question is the healing, the laying of hands, the healing boost. Don't really need that as much. So Dark Moon misses out on that. I can boost that with either my powers or I can boost that with healing pots. But, it's nice to have a little bit of a heal here and there. But the big question, the big trade-off is Stunning Blow versus the Frost Fist, and how that then leads into the ability for the Dark Moon Monk to throw up ways to increase being hit with its powers, or decrease being hit with its powers. That's worth the price of buy-in. Stunning Fist is huge, and it will be useful literally through the entire game. So it's not a power that's like, well, look, I just have to hold over until I get Quivering Palm and my high-level abilities, and then I'll never use it. No, you will use it on many, many things, and it is very, very potent on there. It's good. It's one of the better abilities in the game, especially if you have a party, because if you can run up there with your speed, either core or augmented by items or spells, stun something, and then you've got at least 2 missile weapons, preferably with magic ammo that does secondary damage like exploding arrows or acid arrows. You pile that on, that's a couple of attacks that are free on there, and it's an interrupt. That is really powerful. If you are going to be that frontline fighter as the monk, that's really powerful too. To be able to run up there, pop it off, potentially stun, hit. That's a couple of more free attacks on there. The frost damage that you get as the Dark Moon just pales in comparison. It really, really does, because just, big deal. A couple of extra points of frost on there. There aren't that many things in the game that are fully frost resistant, although Baldur's Gate 2 there are, but it's minimal damage versus the chance to stop damage while the monster's stunned, or the encounter, the party, whatever it's going to be, is stunned on there. That's big. And the bonuses you get, the spell-like abilities with the Dark Moon Monk, you can replicate that. You can replicate that with some key magic items, and it's not really going to take away from much, because the monk, there's not too much out there anyway for the monk to use. So I have to say, as much as I love the Dark Moon, and I play it a lot for role-playing aspects, Vanilla Monk is the best class that's in there, with what it gets, what it gives, and its ability to stay relevant in terms of the innate powers through the entire saga.